Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. The morning started like any other. I rolled out of my cot just after 0700 hours, the air in the tower cool and dry. The sun hadn't yet broken the ridgeline, but it was on its way. I heated a pot of water on the propane burner and made a cup of instant coffee that tasted like someone stirred in a fistful of dirt. Not that I minded. Out here, the little things become ritual. I stepped out onto the catwalk and leaned against the railing, sipping slowly while the treetops stretched below like an ocean of green velvet. Tom, my orange tabby, padded along the edge, tail upright, alert as ever. Lucas, the half-tame raccoon who'd adopted me a couple years back, had already broken into a box of wet wipes and was nibbling on the plastic like it owed him money. The tower sat above everything, 80 feet of creaking steel rising from the bones of the forest. No roads, no traffic, no noise except wind and birdsong. My job was simple: scan the horizon, log weather conditions, and report any sign of fire or unusual activity. The satellite relay system handled most of the automation, but old habits die hard. I still made manual entries in the logbook and double-checked the feed twice a day. The solar panels on the southern slope were tracking sunlight cleanly, and the spare batteries tucked under the tower frame were reading full. Everything was running smooth. Around 0830, I checked in with Echo 4, another lookout post about 60 miles northwest. Jay, the ranger stationed there, replied with his usual short message, confirming all clear. We had a rhythm, check-ins, weather patterns, the occasional conversation about gear or books. We'd never met face-to-face, but voices like his became lifelines in isolation. I sent my log entries, noted visibility at 10+ miles, and went on with my day. Nothing seemed out of place. I swept the catwalk, cleaned the filters, refilled the water tanks from the roof catch, and tried to ignore Lucas dragging my socks under the desk one by one. The first hiccup came around mid-afternoon. It was small, barely worth noticing. My NOAA satellite feed blinked offline for a second, then stuttered back with a corrupted data string. Then the GPS signal froze and restarted. A few minutes later, the weather relay from the national hub started lagging by half a second. I chalked it up to solar interference. Late summer storms in the upper atmosphere sometimes knocked out comms temporarily. I'd seen it before. I made a note in the log and ran a quick systems test. Everything passed. I was still at the console when the call came in. My sister, Jen, calling through the satellite link, her voice tight and whispering like she didn't want someone to hear her. I hadn't spoken to her in over a week. She hated long pauses, hated silence, and hated that I'd buried myself in the middle of nowhere to play tree watcher for half the year. But she never called unless something was wrong. She opened with, "You've seen the news, right?" I hadn't. I told her the uplink had been acting weird. Then she said something that made me sit straight. Hospitals are locking down. Spokane's under some kind of quarantine. They're not saying why. I asked her to slow down, to give me details. She talked fast, scared, like she was trying to get everything out before someone cut the line. There were emergency alerts on every channel, military trucks near the interstate, and social media rumors flying like sparks in dry grass. Some kind of infection spreading in pockets across the state. She mentioned people getting violent, attacking EMTs, reports of erratic behavior, seizures, and biting. I almost laughed. Sounded like another internet wildfire, but her voice was dead serious. She said their neighbor had been taken away in the middle of the night by men in full protective suits. The entire block sealed off. Nobody returned. Then the call dropped. Static. Gone. I tried calling her back 3 times. Nothing. I checked the satellite console. Signal was weak, but the connection was still there. Something else was jamming it. I opened the emergency update channel, but all I got was a federal alert screen. Red banner, black background, automated text crawling across like some forgotten Cold War relic. CDC National Directive. Shelter in place. Maintain distance. Do not engage. No elaboration. No reason. No explanation. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for it to change. It didn't. That night, I heard movement below the tower, not the usual scurrying of deer or pine squirrels. Something larger, slower. The steel frame creaked under a shifting wind, but the scraping sound wasn't coming from the trees. It was closer, like fingernails on metal, somewhere near the base of the ladder. I shut off all interior lights and crouched at the trapdoor with my rifle. Tom slinked into a corner and stayed still. Lucas disappeared under the sink cabinet. For 20 minutes I listened. The sound circled the base twice, then faded into the woods. I didn't sleep much after that. Day 2 began in fog. Visibility dropped to under a mile. Echo 4 didn't check in. I tried hailing 3 times. Nothing. When I tuned back into the Ranger base feed, the live camera was frozen. All I got was a pre-recorded broadcast repeating every 6 hours. Remain indoors. Avoid urban areas. Do not attempt evacuation unless directed. Infected individuals should not be approached. That word again. Infected. I ran a battery of diagnostic checks on my equipment. All green. My systems weren't failing. The world was. By early afternoon, I spotted movement on the fire road. A lone figure stumbling through the trees, dressed in jeans and a blood-smeared windbreaker. He walked with an awkward tilt, one shoulder sagging unnaturally. I raised my binoculars and focused in. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. His mouth hung open, jaw slack. He stopped about 50 feet from the tower base and just stood there, not looking at anything in particular, just facing the tower. Hours passed. He didn't sit, didn't speak, didn't move. As dusk fell, he finally turned and wandered back into the woods. I didn't sleep that night either, kept the lights off, and my ears tuned to the ground. Tom curled up in the supply cabinet. Lucas stayed in the rafters. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the same sound again, scraping metal, slow footsteps on gravel, something sniffing at the ladder. This time it stayed longer. At one point, the trapdoor handle rattled. I gripped the rifle tight but didn't fire. If they didn't know I was here yet, I wasn't going to give them reason to. Day 3. I marked a second figure on the ridge trail, then a third. This one was a woman, long black hair matted down with something dark and sticky. She moved like her legs barely responded, swaying with every step. None of them had backpacks or gear. No signs of trauma beyond dried blood and torn skin. They didn't react to sound, didn't call out. They just walked and stood, like broken marionettes following invisible strings. It wasn't natural. Nothing about this was natural. At midday, the console lit up with a message from Echo 4. One line only. Tower breached, signal failing. Don't trust evac orders. Shelter alone. Then nothing. No coordinates. No voice. Just dead air. I stared at the screen for half an hour, rereading it. Breached. That word stuck in my head. Breached meant overrun. Meant someone got in. Meant Jay probably wasn't alive anymore. I decided to do a full check of the solar panel array that afternoon. A few of the power readings had been inconsistent. I didn't want to climb down, but if I lost power, the tower's comms and systems would fail by day 4 or 5. I locked Tom and Lucas inside, packed a tool roll and the sidearm, and took the ladder down slow. I didn't see anything at first. The southern panel string looked normal, until I got closer. The wiring on the lower left panel had been shredded, not chewed, ripped, like someone used a crowbar to bash through the mount. The panel was cracked straight down the center, completely dead. I stood there in silence, listening. Then I heard a sound, like dry leaves crunching underfoot. I turned slowly and saw one of them standing just inside the tree line. Same blank face, same broken posture. He didn't rush me, didn't speak, just watched. I backed away without turning, eyes on his the whole time, tools clutched tight in my hands. The distance between us was maybe 40 yards. He didn't move. I climbed the ladder fast, slammed the hatch shut, and reinforced it with everything I had. That night, I shut down all external systems and waited. Something thudded against the tower legs once, then silence. The stars above were clear and sharp. Somewhere down the mountain, a scream echoed, too far to tell if it was human or not. I didn't look out the windows. On day 4, I began reworking the tower's perimeter defense. Not that there was much to work with. I set up a pulley system to lower food waste in bait bags far from the base. I took out the emergency mirror kit and arranged them along the catwalk, giving me line of sight on the blind corners. I installed 2 small hunting traps on the ladder's second rung and rigged a noise alarm using tin cans and wire. Lucas inspected every knot like a supervisor. Tom paced constantly, tail twitching. Day 5 passed in a grey blur. Fog returned, thick as wool. I didn't see movement, but I knew they were still out there. I could feel it. That pressure, that tension in the woods, like something waiting just beyond reach. The satellite feed hadn't updated in 2 days. All I had left was static and recycled warnings. I didn't bother shaving. Ate cold beans and ration crackers. Drank filtered rainwater from the collection tank. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jay's last message. Those 5 words like a curse. Don't trust evac. Shelter alone. Day 6, I saw smoke in the far distance. Thin, maybe 30 miles off. Not black like wildfire, but brownish grey. Maybe a building, maybe a crash, maybe a town burning. I flashed my signal mirror 3 times, then waited. No reply. Not even a reflection. The world wasn't responding anymore. By day 7, I stopped using the calendar. The clock still ticked, but time felt artificial. I kept the tower operational, but I stopped expecting to hear from anyone. I spoke to Tom and Lucas like they were roommates. I left the shortwave radio running on loop. I recorded a voice message every evening and stored them on the local drive. Not because I thought someone would find them, but because I needed to pretend I still existed. Day 8. The clouds finally broke this morning, and with the sun came a flicker of hope. My satellite uplink reconnected. Not fully stable, but enough to pull down a thin stream of data. I ran diagnostics twice just to be sure it wasn't a glitch. For the first time in days, I had access to outside information, though I wasn't prepared for what that actually meant. I checked my messages first. There were 3 from Jen, time-stamped over the last 36 hours. The first was shaky. Just a quick, "Are you there? Please answer. Something's happening." The second had more urgency. She said Spokane had issued a curfew. People were being rounded up for medical screenings at transit hubs. The National Guard was deployed to keep order, but nobody was saying what was really going on. Her third message ended mid-sentence. Just cut out. That silence made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt since Dad passed years ago. I called her as soon as the uplink stabilized. She answered, voice low, like she didn't want the neighbors to hear. "You need to stay put," she said. "Don't come down. Don't try to get into town. It's chaos here." I asked her what she meant, and she let it out in a fast, quiet rush. Streets were barricaded. Police scanners were full of code reds. Grocery stores had been looted within hours of the first official curfew. Hospitals were overloaded, not just with injuries, but with whatever this infection was. "People are going nuts," she said. "One guy started bleeding from the mouth during a screening and bit a medic. Just bit him like an animal." I asked what happened next, and she didn't answer for a long time. Then, the whole tent was locked down. Nobody came out. She told me something I hadn't considered until then, that nobody actually knew how the infection was spreading. Was it in the air, saliva, blood, surfaces, animals? No one could agree. Officials said it wasn't airborne, but they were also wearing full-face respirators. "Don't talk to anyone," she said again. "Even if they look okay, don't trust anyone." I promised her I wouldn't leave the tower. I said I was stocked for months. I told her about Tom and Lucas and the precautions I'd taken. She said that was good. Then, her voice cracked. "We might try to head east," she said, "away from the bigger cities. Maybe Canada if the border's still open. I'll text if we move." I told her to be careful. That was the last time we spoke that day. When I tried again later, the signal was dead. By midday, my connection improved enough to load some social media feeds. That's when the full scope of this thing started to sink in. The top trending video was from Paris. Crowds running from a train station, people screaming, smoke pouring from the tunnels. Another showed a Brazilian hospital, doctors pushing gurneys through bloodied corridors, shouting over each other. Grainy phone footage from Chicago had a man yelling, "He got back up! He got back up!" before the screen shook and cut out. In Bangkok, someone filmed a military checkpoint overrun, helicopters taking off without orders, civilians pounding on the gates, left behind. It wasn't just here, this was global. At least a dozen countries with confirmed outbreak zones. Most of the footage had a surreal quality, blurry, shaky, chaotic. I saw a woman running barefoot across a parking lot, her clothes soaked with something dark, while police opened fire on a group that didn't seem to feel the bullets. A soldier with a bandaged arm staring at the camera, whispering something in Russian before the feed collapsed. It felt like watching a dream unravel in real time, or a nightmare. The strange part was how quiet it all was up here. The forest didn't care. The wind kept blowing. The trees kept rustling. Tom still napped in sunbeams, and Lucas still stole anything shiny. But something about the silence became heavier, more deliberate. It was like the whole mountain knew what I'd just seen and chose not to speak about it. Around 1700 hours, I stepped out to the catwalk to clear my head. The sun was setting low, casting long amber streaks across the ridgeline. It had been a tense day, but I'd made it through without incident. I was halfway through eating a spoonful of cold ravioli when I saw it, something fast and unnatural cutting across the horizon from the west. A faint silver glint descending at an angle that didn't feel right. At first I thought it was a meteor, then I saw the wings. It was a plane, a passenger plane, coming in low, too low. It clipped a ridge, spun once like a broken toy, and disappeared behind the southern slope. No sound for 3 seconds. Then the blast hit, dull and distant, but powerful enough to rattle the tower frame. I saw a cloud of smoke bloom like a black flower. I dropped my food and sprinted inside. I pulled up the satellite overlay. There was a red bloom about 20 miles out. The smoke was rising fast, too fast. The southern perimeter was mostly brush and dry timber, with only a couple of access roads for logging trucks. I checked the wind, southwest at 15 miles per hour. That put the fire on a course toward a ravine that fed straight into the lower canyon system. If it jumped that gap, it would be into federal forest territory by midnight. I didn't have time to wait for airdrops or automated fire suppression. I grabbed my gear, stuffed 2 canteens into my pack, and loaded up the ATV stored in the base shed. I hadn't ridden it in over 2 weeks, but it started without protest. I radioed out a wildfire warning to any remaining towers on the loop, even though I wasn't sure anyone was left to hear it. The first time in days I felt adrenaline. Not panic, but focused urgency. It took me 40 minutes to reach the outer ridge, where the impact had scarred the forest. The plane was in pieces. No survivors in sight. Smoke stung my eyes, and the heat rolled like a wave even from 50 yards out. Several trees were already burning. The wreckage had torn a path through saplings and dry brush, and smaller fires were starting in multiple directions. I couldn't put it all out, but I could buy time. I located a natural choke point, a narrow ravine full of rocky outcroppings. If I could trench there, cut the fuel line, I might keep the fire from jumping the ridge. I worked for hours with my Pulaski and shovel, sweat soaking through my shirt, lungs burning with smoke. I used all 3 emergency suppressant packs I had in my fire kit, one on the south slope, one on the ridge crest, and one directly in the trench. The fire roared closer, but I kept digging. When the first embers started falling, I backed off and watched. The line held. For now. I stayed until well after dark, watching the flames shift and flicker in the distance. I marked their path with glow sticks on the trail back, just in case I had to return. By the time I reached the tower again, it was after midnight. My legs ached. My back was stiff. I had smoke in my hair, cuts on both hands, and my voice was gone from shouting into the wind. Tom meowed when I came in, like I'd been gone a year. Lucas pawed at my boot and dragged a stale cracker from under the table like a peace offering. I poured a small bowl of water for both of them, then collapsed on the cot without even changing. As I lay there, every muscle sore, I realized something that hadn't fully hit me before. There was no backup coming, no airdrop, no patrol, no government team to sweep the ridge and contain the spread. That plane had gone down and nobody was coming to check why. I could still send alerts, still log data, but no one was reading it. The sky outside was filled with stars. Bright, cold, endless. The kind of sky that made you feel like the last person alive. I lay awake for hours listening to the creaks of the tower, the occasional gust of wind, and the low breath of the world changing outside my window. Day 9 began in darkness, though the sun had already started to rise. Wind howled across the mountain, bending the trees below into a slow, unified sway. Clouds rolled in heavy and thick, low enough to brush the ridgelines, and the air had that unmistakable electric smell. Ozone, pine, smoke. I sat at the window with my second cup of coffee, watching the tree line vanish behind a curtain of grey. I'd barely slept. My body ached from the fire line work. My fingers still stung from gripping tools through gloves that had worn thin. But I couldn't ignore the weather. Something was shifting. The fire was still burning, though the perimeter had held overnight. I could see the glow just beyond the southern slope, flickering through the smoke like a dying campfire. But the wind was pushing hard now, from the north this time, barreling across the upper ridge, with enough force to send pine cones slamming against the tower walls. That changed everything. By 0600 hours, the temperature had dropped by nearly 15 degrees. Rain followed, light at first, then stronger, driven sideways by the wind. The smoke thickened, dragged down by humidity, and hung low in the valley like fog. I climbed out onto the catwalk with binoculars and scanned the impact site. Flames still danced in small pockets, but the spread was done. The storm was choking it out, a natural break, a lucky one. With the worst of the fire dampened and the smoke pinned low, I could finally see the damage. Entire sections of forest were blackened. A half-mile scar of charred earth stretched from the crash zone down into a ravine. Some of the tallest pines were stripped bare, snapped halfway up their trunks like twigs. The plane had hit harder than I realized. I hadn't been able to reach the wreckage in the dark. But now, with the storm settling in and the wind dying down, I had a window. By mid-afternoon, I started packing. Full medkit, water, gloves, tarp, flare gun, and my rifle. I left a sealed box of dry food near the hatch in case I didn't make it back by nightfall. Tom sat beside my boots, ears twitching. Lucas was curled into a tight ball in the storage bin, nose tucked under one paw. I crouched beside them both and muttered something about being gone a few hours, maybe less. I don't know why I said it. I didn't believe it myself. The ATV handled worse than it had the day before. The soaked ground made the ride jerky, and a fog bank had rolled in low to the ground, swallowing the narrow road in waves of milky white. I rode slower this time, more cautious. Every shadow made me grip the brake. Every sudden movement in the trees sent my heart skipping a beat. There was no sound but the rumble of the engine and the occasional call of a raven overhead. Even the forest seemed afraid to make noise. The first body came into view just after I crossed the dry creek bed. I wasn't ready. Not for that. He was lying on his side, mouth open, eyes gone, jaw shattered. His torso had been torn wide open from sternum to hip, and the exposed organs were slick and red and wrong. I stopped the ATV so fast I almost dumped it, and for a second all I could do was stare. My stomach turned. I dropped to my knees beside the trail and threw up, just bile and half-digested oats. My arms shook as I wiped my mouth on my sleeve. The air felt suddenly thinner. My ears rang. I wanted to turn around right there. But I didn't. I forced myself forward, even though my legs didn't want to cooperate. And it only got worse from there. The further I went, the more carnage I found. Another man, tangled in the branches of a snapped tree like he'd been thrown into it by an explosion. His legs hanging limp, the bark streaked with blood. A woman half buried in brush, her neck clearly broken, fingers curled around a child's shoe. A chunk of what had to be a torso lying on a stump, surrounded by shredded clothing and bits of seatbelt webbing. I felt my body go cold, like a switch had been thrown. I couldn't process it. I couldn't even think. Just keep moving. Just don't stop. I parked the ATV 200 yards from the main wreckage, hidden behind a rock outcropping. The last thing I wanted was to draw attention if anything was still alive out here. And by now, I wasn't sure if alive meant safe anymore. The plane had sheared itself across a slope and into a shallow ravine. The tail section was unrecognizable, broken into jagged metal ribbons. One engine had been thrown clean through a grove of fir trees, and now sat hissing in a crater of churned soil. The central fuselage was cracked wide open like an overripe fruit. There were more bodies, some still strapped to their seats, faces frozen mid-scream, others slumped against bulkheads or lying limp outside the break in the fuselage. A trail of blood led from the shattered door down into the ravine, but the source was long gone. I kept my rifle raised, finger just outside the trigger guard, breath low. Every movement in the smoke made me flinch. That's when I heard it, a muffled voice, weak, male. I moved slowly, stepping over wreckage and glass, deeper into the cabin. A young man lay slumped against an overhead storage bin, his left arm twisted behind him at an unnatural angle. His right leg had been pinned beneath a collapsed seat frame. He was pale, shaking, blood soaking through the front of his shirt, but his eyes were still focused, still human. He looked up at me like I was a hallucination. "Help," he said, barely audible. "Please." I knelt beside him, checked his pulse, then started working on the seat pinning his leg. He was bleeding badly. I used a pressure dressing from my kit and gave him sips of water. He was in shock, barely coherent. He started, then coughed hard. They came back after the crash. I asked him who. He didn't answer. He just stared through me, like he was seeing something worse behind my eyes. In the rear of the cabin, I found another survivor. A woman, probably mid-40s, seated in the far corner of the broken hull, her arm wrapped in torn gauze. Her skin was pale, mottled. I moved closer and saw the bite on her shoulder, deep, ragged, purple at the edges. She was sweating through her clothes, eyes fluttering, lips trembling. She looked at me and whispered, "Don't let me turn." Then she closed her eyes and slumped forward, still breathing, but barely. There were others here once. The cabin had signs of movement, drag marks, handprints smeared in blood, emergency kits torn open, but no other voices, no replies, just silence and the creak of the broken fuselage in the wind. I stayed with the two survivors for a while, unsure what to do. I couldn't lift them both. I had no stretcher, no help, no medevac, and I knew neither of them would survive the trip back. I told myself I'd stay for an hour, just to keep them company, just to make sure they didn't die alone. To keep myself from spiraling, I scavenged. I found sealed snacks in the galley, a few bottles of water, and 2 small first aid kits. I found a flare gun and 2 cartridges. One of the dead crew still had a working flashlight clipped to her belt. I took it all. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to keep moving. I needed to stay alive. The survivors were both unconscious now. The man's breathing had slowed. The woman had stopped shaking. I was kneeling by the cargo hatch, sorting supplies, when I heard a sound behind me. Not a groan, not speech, just movement. I turned fast and saw the woman standing. Her eyes were open, but empty. Her mouth twitched, opening wider than it should have. Her head snapped toward me like a marionette on a string. I dropped the supplies and raised my rifle. She lunged. There was no hesitation, no confusion, just a sudden, jerking sprint, her body flailing in ways that no injured person should have been capable of. I fired once, missed, fired again, hit her shoulder. No effect. I backed into the wall and emptied the rest of the magazine. 4 more shots, center mass. She fell, but kept moving. I had to use the last round to put her down through the eye. I stood there in the smoke-filled wreckage, rifle empty, arms shaking, ears ringing from the shots. The young man didn't stir. He hadn't even opened his eyes. I checked him. His pulse was gone. He must have slipped away while I was scavenging. Maybe that was for the best. I didn't leave right away. I stayed until the wind shifted and the smoke started curling through the broken fuselage like fingers. I stacked a few crates around their bodies and draped one of the plane's emergency blankets over them. It wasn't much, but it was what I could do. By the time I reached the ATV again, I felt numb, empty. My clothes stank of gunpowder, oil, and dried blood. The ride back was a blur. Every stump looked like a figure, every shadow a threat. I reached the tower just as the sun dipped below the ridge, orange light slicing across the treetops like a parting shot from the day. Tom didn't move from the window. Lucas chirped once and vanished under the bench. I locked the hatch behind me and collapsed onto the floor. For the first time since this started, I cried. Not for them specifically, not even for me, just for everything, for what the world had become in only 9 days. I didn't sleep the night I got back from the crash site. I tried, more than once. I crawled into my cot, closed my eyes, pulled the blanket up even though it was too warm, but sleep never came. Every time I drifted, I saw her face again, the way her eyes rolled back just before she stood up, the snap of her limbs as if death had untethered her from basic physics. I felt the weight of the empty rifle in my lap. I saw the blood on my hands. When I finally sat up for good, it was just before 0400 hours. Tom was sleeping on the window ledge, undisturbed by the nightmare I couldn't shake. Lucas was somewhere inside the supply shelf, his occasional chittering the only sound in the room. The wind had picked up again, this time from the east, and the tower creaked in a slow, rhythmic sway, like it was trying to rock me into some false sense of peace. I made coffee just to do something with my hands. Stronger than usual, black, bitter, too hot. I drank it anyway. I kept going over the moment in my head, the way the woman had changed. It wasn't gradual. There was no slow turn, no visible seizure. 1 minute she was unconscious, the next, something else had taken over. It wasn't like a virus spreading through cells. It was like a switch had flipped, fast, violent, final. That terrified me more than anything I'd seen, because it meant there was no time, no warning. If someone near you was bitten and passed out, you had seconds, maybe less. Not enough to think, just enough to react. And if you hesitated, even for a moment, you'd be dead, or worse, turned. I didn't know which outcome scared me more. The storm had passed completely by sunrise, leaving a slick sheen across the landscape. The sky had cleared to a pale blue, deceptively calm. Smoke from the crash still rose in the distance, but it was thinner now, drifting sideways into the next valley. The fire was dead. The wreckage would cool, but I knew something had changed. The silence around the tower wasn't natural anymore. It wasn't peace. It was waiting. I spent the morning checking the perimeter again. My traps were untouched. The tin can alarms still lined the ladder and the stair platform, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept the rifle close, newly loaded now, though the box of ammo was running low. I only had 3 magazines left, and 2 of those weren't full. Every bullet had started to feel like a promise, or a bargaining chip. Around 1000 hours, I ran another systems check. Solar output was recovering. The storm had knocked a few panels out of alignment, but nothing serious. I scrubbed the battery terminals with vinegar and baking soda, resecured the grounding cable, and restarted the inverters. It took nearly an hour. Normally it would have been routine, boring, but today, every sound made me freeze. A branch snapped once on the slope below, and I nearly fell from the ladder. It turned out to be a deer. But for those 10 seconds, rifle in my arms, adrenaline thudding in my ears, I was ready to kill something. Anything. I don't like what that says about me. By midday, I finally forced myself to inventory what I'd brought back from the crash. 2 water bottles, a few sealed snack trays, a working flashlight, and 1 unopened trauma kit. I laid everything out on the table and took stock of what I had left. Supplies were still decent. 2.5 months of food if I stretched it. Plenty of iodine tablets. Water wasn't an issue unless the tanks froze early, but the biggest variable, the one I couldn't predict, was what might come out of the forest. That thought gnawed at me all afternoon. Not the possibility of another fire, or a communications failure, or even an equipment breakdown. Just the idea that something, or someone, could show up here and change everything. I'd seen enough to know the infected weren't staying in the cities. Some had made it this far already. They moved slowly, aimlessly, but they moved. I kept wondering how that woman on the plane had turned. Had she died hours before I got there and reanimated later? Or had she slipped away while I was gathering supplies, and then come back? If so, that meant there was a delay. Minutes, maybe more. Enough to fool someone into thinking it was just shock or unconsciousness. That delay was what scared me most. It meant I could be in the same room with someone who looked dead, and they'd be upright and snarling before I realized they weren't done yet. Around 1500 hours, I sat down to write in the logbook for the first time since the crash. I tried to explain what I saw, what I'd heard, how she moved, but the words didn't land right. It sounded like fiction, like some drug-fueled hallucination. I kept rewriting the same sentence. She got up like nothing had happened. I crossed it out 3 times before just letting it stand. I decided to update the emergency report logs through the satellite terminal, just in case someone was still listening. I included coordinates of the crash, a detailed assessment of the perimeter damage, and noted confirmed fatalities with the phrase, "No survivors remaining." I didn't explain what I meant by that. I didn't know how. That night, I cooked one of the meals I'd found in the galley, some kind of airline pasta sealed in a vacuum pack. It tasted like glue and aluminum. I ate half, gave the rest to Tom. Lucas refused his usual crackers, and instead curled up under the desk, facing the wall. Animals always know before we do. I've stopped doubting that. I spent most of the night staring through binoculars, scanning the trees in slow, steady sweeps. I saw no movement, no firelight, no glint of eyes. But I knew something had changed. I could feel it. The woods weren't still anymore. They were just holding their breath. Just after 0100 hours, I heard something new. It wasn't a groan or a screech. It was a voice, barely audible, drifting up from the slope. A man's voice, calling for help. But it was wrong. It repeated the same words again and again, in the same tone. No desperation, no urgency, just, "Hey, can you help me? Please help me." Every 15 seconds. Over and over. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I watched. After nearly 20 minutes, the voice faded. I never saw who it belonged to, but I knew better than to believe it was really a man. I've started to realize that the danger isn't just in the infection. It's in what people become when the rules fall apart. The infected are terrifying, but they're predictable. It's the living I'm starting to worry about. I stayed up until sunrise. I cleaned the rifle twice, counted my ammo again, started putting together a checklist for barricading the stairwell in case something ever climbed up this far. The trapdoor's strong, but I want more than that between me and whatever's walking around below. I think tomorrow I'll try to set up a second perimeter, maybe run some wire with empty cans out further along the trail. I've got an old weather sensor I might convert into a motion alarm. I don't know. The truth is, I don't know how long this tower can stay safe. And I don't know how long I can stay sane up here, watching the world unravel from 100 feet above it. But I'm not ready to leave. Not yet. I'm not running unless I have to. This tower's my last stronghold. It's the only high ground I've got. And for now, that has to be enough. Day 10 through 17 passed in a kind of quiet I didn't trust. It wasn't peace. Not really. Just the slow hum of systems working, trees swaying, animals returning to old patterns. The infected didn't come close during that stretch, at least not visibly. A few times I spotted something through the binoculars at the far edge of the tree line, swaying on uneven feet, but it never got closer than 400 yards. It was enough distance that I didn't raise the rifle. Just watched, measured its pace, waited until it was out of view. Then I logged it like weather. The most activity I had during those days wasn't from the infected at all. It was wildlife. On the 12th night, a pack of something, either coyotes or feral dogs, sniffed around the base of the tower. I counted 6 pairs of eyes in the dark, low to the ground, weaving through the brush like they'd done this before. One of them tried pawing at the bottom rung of the ladder. When it realized it couldn't climb, it howled once and backed off. The rest circled, searching for anything edible. They stayed for hours, left muddy prints across the solar array, knocked over 2 of my food drop tins, never returned after that. But I didn't sleep that night. Around day 14, I found signs that something, maybe a bear, had rummaged through the perimeter trap line. One of the snare wires was yanked clean off the stake, dragged several yards too. I followed the trail until I found the remains of what used to be a raccoon, but it had been half-eaten and abandoned. The thing that took it didn't finish the job. That worried me more than if it had. Despite the tension, the systems held steady. Satellite internet was spotty, but mostly functional. I still ran basic diagnostics each morning. Solar output, weather data transmission, battery levels. Everything came back green. The water tanks were still in good condition. Rain was sparse, but the reserve tanks hadn't dipped below safe levels. I focused on routine. That's what kept the mind from unraveling. Wake, check systems, clean catwalk, monitor wildlife, recount supplies, talk to Tom, ignore the static on the radio. Then came day 18. It started out like the others. I woke at 0600 hours, fed Tom, refilled Lucas's water dish, checked the emergency light indicators. All green. I stepped out onto the catwalk with a cup of coffee, steam curling in the cold morning air. It was overcast, a soft grey dome pressing down on the valley. At 0740, I returned inside to begin my routine log entry. Everything felt normal. At 0800 exactly, the tower's emergency broadcast system activated on its own. The siren cut through the air like a knife. One long, automated tone at full volume, followed by a harsh, synthetic voice looped through every speaker in the system. I hadn't touched the console. I hadn't authorized a test. This was not scheduled. Federal emergency alert. This is a recorded message issued at 0800 hours, Mountain Time, by the United States Emergency Broadcast System. Multiple containment zones have failed. Avoid metropolitan regions. Sheltering outside urban centers is advised. CDC Interim Directive. Infection may present with delayed neurological response. Bites and blood exposure are to be treated as terminal. Do not trust unverified evacuation routes. The message repeated 4 times before I found the override switch and silenced the speakers. My hands shook as I shut it off. I hadn't heard a broadcast at that volume since wildfire season in 2019. That was a lifetime ago. I pulled up the satellite console and saw the message source code. It hadn't come from the Ranger network. This was government issue, Department of Homeland Security tier. Not local, not automated from our end. That meant somewhere, someone with clearance had queued that signal. Maybe hours ago, maybe days. But it was still running, still alive. Before I could dig further, a notification popped up. Voice message received. Sender, Jen. I froze, then hit play. Her voice was ragged, tired, but alive. Hey, I don't know if you're still getting these. The signal's crap now. We're heading north. Got out of Spokane. Too dangerous. People were going nuts. Looting, checkpoints, people faking bites to skip lines. It's bad, Cal. Real bad. She coughed once, off mic. We heard a rumor. Canada's keeping the smaller crossings open. No official word, but folks say it's safer up there. Less dense population, fewer infected. Maybe they're doing things differently. We're going to try near Rossland. There's an old service road that used to cut through the trees. If we make it, I'll ping you. But don't count on it. Signals dying every hour. Internet's going dark in blocks. There was a pause. I could hear an engine rumbling in the background. Wind. I know I said don't leave your tower, but if this keeps spreading, I don't know how far it'll reach. Just take care of yourself, okay? You always were the stubborn one. I love you. The message ended. I didn't move for almost 10 minutes. I just sat there, hands clasped around the back of my neck, staring at the satellite console. A dozen thoughts swirled at once. Canada, safe zones, signal loss, unverified evac routes, containment zones failed. The dots were connecting, but the picture was still incomplete. All I had were scattered fragments, and no way to know what was true anymore. I replayed her message once, then shut the system down and unplugged the main antenna cable. If that alarm had triggered once without my input, it could do it again. And I didn't want that kind of noise drawing attention to the tower. Sound carried far out here, too far. After a while, I stood up and opened the hatch. The air outside was cooler now, still grey, still quiet. The forest below looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. I scanned with binoculars. Movement near the western slope, a slow figure weaving between fallen branches. I couldn't make out the face, but the gait was familiar. Not a bear, not a deer, something else. Maybe more than one. I decided not to shoot. Not yet. I backed away from the ledge and checked the traps again. Toucans had been tripped but not broken. Something had nudged them and retreated. A test, or a mistake. Either way, something was getting bolder. I spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing the hatch. I added another brace across the trapdoor and moved 2 crates of gear over the ladder bolts. If anything climbed this far, I wanted every second of warning I could buy. My chest was tight the whole time. Not from fear exactly. Something worse. A quiet acceptance I didn't want to name. When night came, I left the lights off. Sat in the corner with the rifle across my lap. Lucas crept out once, sniffed my boot, then curled against the stove. Tom watched the door all evening without blinking. I didn't hear any more messages that night, but I didn't expect to. Day 19 began with a familiar rhythm. Wake, sweep the catwalk, check the traps, boil water, run the systems. But something in me already knew that pattern wouldn't last much longer. The satellite terminal had been failing more frequently. Not a hard crash, just slower boot times, corrupted packets, dropped pings. The upload queue for outgoing messages now hovered uselessly at 48% and hadn't budged in over a day. The internet was collapsing like everything else, just more quietly. A slow fade into silence instead of fire and screams. I tried checking the news feeds mid-morning. Nothing loaded. The cached headlines were almost a week old. A few foreign reports. Germany declaring martial law, the UK closing sea lanes, Mexico City, overwhelmed. A blurry cell phone image from somewhere in India showing a burning overpass covered in figures that didn't move like people. But none of the links opened anymore. Dead URLs, broken video players, scrambled metadata. Like the digital world was rotting from the inside out. I pulled the antenna cord again, not because it would help, just because I didn't want to watch the signal die slowly. Better to unplug it myself. By 0900, the fog was beginning to lift. I took the binoculars and did a slow sweep of the western ridge. The forest shimmered with residual damp, bark still blackened from the fire. In the distance, far enough to be safe but close enough to watch, I saw a shape moving between the tree trunks. One figure, human-sized, upright but wrong, not hunched, not dragging like the infected I'd seen earlier in the week. This one walked slow but straight, like he still remembered what his legs were for. I followed his progress for 10 minutes. He never looked up, just wandered along the game trail, disappearing behind ridges, reappearing near a broken stump. I kept the rifle on the windowsill but didn't raise it. I waited for him to show his face. He never did. By afternoon, the wind had shifted again, east to west this time, and brought with it the scent of smoke. Not fresh fire, old burn, maybe even the last of the plane wreckage finally giving in. It filled the tower like a memory. I tried airing it out with the catwalk hatch open, but it made no difference. That smell had a way of lingering in the bones. I heard the voices around 0400 hours. Not shouts, not screams, quiet, almost conversational. I was inside, pouring water into the purifier when it happened. I froze mid-step and tilted my head toward the sound. 2, maybe 3 voices, low and clipped. One male, one female, possibly a third further off. They weren't yelling for help, they were talking to each other. I snapped the lights off and climbed the ladder to the top catwalk. The forest was still dim beneath the canopy, though the last sliver of sun lit the far ridge. I scanned the eastern slope and eventually found them. 3 people walking in loose formation, wearing packs, moving slow, heads on swivels. They weren't infected, not from what I could tell, but something about them made my stomach knot. They weren't looking for help, they were looking for something else. I lowered myself back into the tower and quietly bolted the trapdoor. Lucas had already disappeared into the corner bin again. Tom watched me from the radio console, ears down. I moved slowly, checking that the ladders were still rigged with tin alarms and that nothing had shifted from my earlier barricade work. I didn't know what these people wanted, but I wasn't going to shout down and find out. They passed below the tower an hour later. I never heard them speak again. Just boots on gravel, a soft clatter of gear, and then fading footsteps. I watched from behind the shuttered glass until I was sure they were gone. Then I waited another 20 minutes. I don't know what it says about me that I was more afraid of the living than the infected, but I've stopped pretending I wouldn't shoot if I had to. I'm not proud of that. I'm just honest. By day 21, the terminal was offline for good. It wouldn't boot at all. I opened the casing, reseated the uplink card, even swapped in the last spare micro relay I had. Nothing. Just blinking red lights and a dead screen. The last message I sent to Jen was still marked unsent. I don't know if she made it to Canada. I don't know if she made it out of Washington. I left the message queued anyway. I typed out, "Still alive, still in the tower, no evac, watching the perimeter. Hope you're safe. I'm proud of you." Then I closed the laptop and didn't open it again. By day 24, I stopped using dates and started marking the days with lines on the support beam. 1 line per morning, 7 lines per side. A crude calendar built from desperation. It didn't matter what day of the week it was anymore. There were only 2 measurements now, before it all ended and after. I started talking out loud more often. At first it was just to Tom, then to Lucas, then just to the room. I told stories. I repeated weather patterns. I narrated my actions like I was making a training video for an audience that didn't exist. It helped, until it didn't. Day 25 brought rain again, hard and steady, the kind that made everything feel small. I spent the day writing in the physical logbook. No screens, no terminals, just ink and paper. I recorded the incident with the travelers, detailed what I saw, noted their gear, military surplus, no insignia, well packed, probably former guard, or just smart scavengers. Either way, not the kind you want knocking on your door. I added something new to the log that day, a thought I hadn't been able to shake. What if I'm not supposed to be a lookout anymore? What if the thing I'm watching for is already inside the lines? I didn't know what I meant by that. Not yet. On day 26, I woke up to silence. A deep, impossible silence. No birds, no wind, no creaking beams. Just a stillness that made me think I had gone deaf in the night. I checked every window. The forest was there, but it was wrong. No rustling leaves, no insects, just still trees. Then I heard the first knock. It wasn't loud, not aggressive, just deliberate. Once, then again, and again, coming from the trapdoor. I didn't move. I sat on the floor with the rifle on my knees, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between knocks. They came like a heartbeat, steady, patient. I waited an hour before crawling to the hatch. When I opened it, there was nothing there. Just a small, empty can swinging gently from the wire line, and muddy boot prints on the lowest rung of the ladder. 4 days passed after the knock. 4 days of pacing the catwalk and checking the traps every hour. 4 days of waking up at night with the rifle already in my hands. 4 days of nothing. No more voices. No more figures in the trees. Just the echo of that quiet, steady rhythm against the hatch. I convinced myself it was an animal. A mistake. A branch that twisted just right in the wind. I checked the ladder again. There were boot prints, yes, but rain had softened them. It could have been mine. Could have been weeks old. I told myself that. I told myself a lot of things. But something inside me didn't believe it. Not really. By day 30, I needed to restock one of the supply caches I'd buried 3 weeks earlier. A backup plan, in case the tower ever burned, or I was forced out. 1 ammo tin, sealed, filled with freeze-dried food, batteries, a spare water filter, a flare, and an emergency radio. I'd hidden it half a mile downhill, buried beneath a false rock behind a cluster of rotted stumps. Well hidden. No markers. Not even Tom had seen me dig it. That morning, the wind was soft. No movement in the trees. The forest seemed calm, like it was giving me permission. I packed light. Just reserve rifle, since the main one was still in bad shape. Also the trench knife, and my side sat phone. I was down there less than 40 minutes. But it was enough. It was enough time for them to move. I knew something was wrong the moment I came back up the western trail. The tower felt quiet, not just empty, silenced. The catwalk was missing the blue tarp I'd tied down last week. One of the solar panels was repositioned, wrong angle for morning sun. There was movement through the slatted windows, shapes I didn't recognize. And then I saw it. My own boots, lying at the base of the ladder. One upright, one sideways, like they'd been thrown. I froze. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. My legs told me what my brain hadn't processed yet. They locked up, wouldn't move forward. I stayed crouched behind a fallen log and waited, listened. Voices, laughter, someone humming. A man shouted something from inside the tower. Couldn't hear the words, but the tone was casual, familiar, like they belonged. Then I saw one of them. Tall, tan canvas jacket, military surplice, beard, sunburned skin, heavy boots. He stepped out onto the catwalk holding my rifle, and raised it toward the tree line. He scanned the slope casually, like he'd done it before. He didn't see me, but I saw him, and I understood. They'd followed me. Those hikers I saw days ago, the ones who passed below the tower, didn't call out, didn't wave. They weren't just wandering. They'd been watching, studying, maybe saw the solar grid, maybe saw the food lines I used to bait animals, maybe saw the way I moved, where I kept watch. They knew what I had. They knew what it was worth. And they waited for a chance. I backed away. No plan, no direction, just instinct. I was 200 yards down the trail when the first of them stepped out from the blind behind me. I didn't hear him, didn't smell him, just felt something wrong, too late. Then pain. Something struck the side of my skull. Not hard enough to knock me cold, but hard enough to blind me for a second. I dropped the rifle. Another hand caught my elbow. I twisted, kicked, bit. I fought. But it didn't matter. There were 3 of them. They didn't say much, didn't scream or threaten, just grunted instructions to each other. Bag, straps, take the pack. I remember one of them punching me in the stomach when I tried to bite his forearm. Another grabbed my belt and ripped the sat phone from my hip. They didn't kill me, but they didn't have to. They dragged me, half-conscious, bleeding, into the clearing below the ridge and dropped me there. I remember one of them saying something like, "Should have stayed hidden." Another said, "We'll leave the cat. Raccoon's probably long gone." Then footsteps, then silence. I don't know how long I laid there. Long enough for the sky to go from grey to gold. Long enough for the birds to start singing again, like they didn't know what had happened. When I stood up, everything hurt. My side, my ribs, my right eye wouldn't fully open. I had no gear, no bag, no weapons, not even shoes. They'd taken my socks too, maybe for kindling. I made it to a stream and cleaned my face with shaking hands. Blood had dried under my nose. My lip was split. My left wrist was swollen. I tore off part of my undershirt to bind it. I didn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because I was too dehydrated to bother. I made a fire that night, small, smokeless. I used rocks to form a basin, dried moss for tinder. I slept beneath a log, body curled around the flame. I dreamed of nothing. The next morning, day 31, or whatever day it was, I watched smoke rising from the tower. Just a cooking fire, I think. Maybe they were boiling water, maybe heating food from my stash. I watched it for hours from the ridgeline, and that's when I made the choice. I wasn't going to crawl away into the woods like a wounded animal. I was going to take it back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not this week, but soon. That tower was mine. I built its defenses. I mapped its blind spots. I trained every motion sensor and adjusted every panel. They didn't know the layout like I did. They didn't know the false drawer under the battery rack. They didn't know the alternate route down the dry riverbed that let you circle around from the south. They thought they'd won, but they were wrong. They thought I'd die in the woods. They thought they'd won. But I didn't die. I spent the first 2 days nursing injuries and staying invisible. I moved only at night, low to the ground, wrapped in dirt and pine needles, drinking from muddy runoff. I dug under old logs for beetles when hunger got too loud. I kept to the lowlands, thick with brush, silent as a cave. I saw them on the tower catwalk now and then, tiny silhouettes. One smoked, another cleaned my rifle. They looked calm, confident. They laughed once. I heard it echo down the slope, like this was over. But I wasn't done. By day 34, I had charted their schedule. I knew when they woke. I knew who stood watch and who slept in. I knew which one checked the southern traps and which one slacked off on the second perimeter. They moved like men in peacetime. Lazy, loud, overconfident. They wore their gear wrong, didn't maintain the rigging, let solar output drop. I watched from the tree line. I watched every step they took. On day 36, I hiked to the wreckage of the plane. No food, no pack, just resolve. The fire had long since gone cold, and the bodies I'd left behind were gone. Dragged off or decomposed, I couldn't tell. The twisted hull was half buried under new leaves, rusting from the inside out. But the gear was still there, crates shoved behind seating panels, paramedic pouches wedged under buckled flooring. I knew where to look. I came away with 3 knives, a handheld rescue flare launcher, 2 half-charged emergency radios, a climbing harness, duct tape, a sealed first aid box, and a long screwdriver I'd later use as a weapon. I found a cracked face shield. It fit over my bruised temple like a puzzle piece. The real prize was under the pilot's chair, a collapsed carbon fiber axe, used for cutting fuselage panels, razor-sharp, carbon-edged. I tested it on a rotten tree. It bit through like air. I named it the repeater, because it would swing until silence returned. I returned to the ridgeline on day 38 and left no trail behind. I ate squirrels, berries, pine nuts. I stole a dead bird from a coyote's den. I was becoming something else. Something silent. I waited for fog, waited for rain, waited for them to forget. They did. On day 39, I watched one of them wander off alone, just like before. Southern slope, stupid routine. His name, I later learned, was Mark. He wore my pack, used my hatchet to break branches for kindling. I followed him for nearly an hour, close enough to smell his breath. He stopped to relieve himself at a shallow stream. I didn't wait. The first strike with the axe hit between his shoulder blades. He didn't even scream. The second ended it. I buried him in the same stream bed he pissed in, left his boots sticking out like roots. One down. I didn't go back to the tower that night. I stayed in the gully, ate the last of the squirrel meat, cleaned the axe with leaves, memorized their silhouettes through the binoculars. 2 left, the man with the beard and the younger one with the limp. I waited for wind. Day 40. I herded a pack of infected toward the tower. Not directly. I'd found them down in the valley, 3 of them, broken but mobile. I led them like sheep with sound, banged 2 cans together from a stick, laid down streaks of scent with meat scraps. They followed, slowly, but they followed, toward the tower. At the same time, I cut the lower rope ladder. Then I disabled the pulley system for hauling water. They didn't know it yet, but I was bleeding them, wearing them down. At midnight, I fired 1 flare into the air from the south trail and another from the east. They panicked, just like I knew they would. One of them came down to check, young, limping, flashlight trembling in the dark. I used the terrain, forced him toward the ravine. He called out twice. No answer. I let him get close. Then I dropped from the trees. He fought, harder than the first, but not smarter. I had higher ground. When he stumbled over a root, I pinned him, drove the screwdriver between his ribs. Clean, quiet. The infected were still miles behind. I didn't want them here. Yet. 2 down. The last one, the one with the beard, stayed in the tower. I watched him through the shutter. He paced, carried my rifle like he still owned it. He yelled down into the trees, but no one answered. I made sure of that. On the final night, Day 41. I circled back under fog cover, climbed the south ladder with my hands bare and silent. He hadn't reset the tin can alarm. Arrogant. I reached the hatch and waited, listened. He was playing music on the radio. My radio. Low static folk songs from the backup drive. I knocked once. Just once. He opened the trapdoor half awake. I saw the whites of his eyes in the dark. He whispered, "Mark?" I pulled him down, and we fell together. He landed hard. I landed harder. We fought in silence. Fists and elbows and blood. He bit me once. Caught skin, but didn't break. I wrapped the duct tape from the flight kit around his throat and dragged him to the edge of the platform. He went over screaming, but I didn't watch him hit. Then I was alone, standing in the tower, my tower. I barred the hatch again, reset the alarms, recalibrated the solar input, cleaned the blood with bleach and rainwater. I gathered what food they hadn't wasted. Most of my gear was still intact. They hadn't known how to access the cache under the battery racks. My maps, my journal, my last rounds of ammo. They never even found Lucas. Tom returned 2 days later, thin but alive, crawling out from the deadwood like nothing had happened. He meowed once and curled up on the corner of my cot like he'd just finished a long shift. I made soup. I shaved. I turned the tower lights back on. That night, I climbed to the catwalk and looked out across the forest. The infected were still out there. So were others. They never went away. Not entirely, but I stopped flinching when I saw them. There were fewer each week. Some wandered north, pulled by noise or instinct. Some rotted where they stood. The forest itself seemed to swallow them up, roots reclaiming bones, wind covering tracks. I held the tower for 19 more days. I reinforced the supports, repositioned the mirrors, dug 2 new deadfall traps further down the western ridge, and laid them with crushed pine cones and rusted nails. I restocked the emergency supply cache I'd lost. The axe stayed by the door, the rifle stayed loaded. On day 42, I heard voices on the shortwave again, weak and scratchy, a woman's voice reading numbers in sequence. Nothing else. Maybe code, maybe nothing. The next day, a different voice, male, British accent, repeating a single word, "Welcome." I logged it. I didn't answer. Day 45, a lone infected reached the base of the tower, looked up once, didn't climb, just stood there until dusk, then wandered off into the trees like it forgot what it was doing. Day 49, a buck died in one of my snares, fed me for 4 days. Lucas came out from hiding and sat near the fire at night. He wouldn't let me touch him, but he watched the door. That was enough. Day 53, a drone passed overhead. First sign of tech in weeks. High altitude, silver, no markings. I tried flashing a signal mirror, but it didn't respond. Kept going east. Didn't return. Day 55, I found an old family photo the hikers had stuffed behind the bookshelf. Not mine, someone else's. A woman and 2 boys on a boat dock. I burned it. Some things don't belong here. Day 57, I thought about leaving. Packed a bag, studied the maps again, but something in my chest said no. Said hold. Said stay just a little longer. Day 59, rain came hard. Flooded the old stream bed. Washed away the last boot prints from the men who'd tried to take this place. I watched it all from above. Dry, alive. Sharper than I'd ever been. And now, day 60, I'm still here. The power's holding. The traps are sharp. The animals keep their distance. The infected haven't returned in days. No new voices on the radio. No sign of Jen. No messages from the outside. But that's okay. I've got food. I've got silence. I've got 2 working hands and a tower they'll never take again. If this is the end of the world, I could do worse than the top of the mountain. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.